Hi, my name is Connor Riley, and on this week's Connor in Coverage, I'm going to explain why you shouldn't play with your food. Our first winner this week are the Georgia pass catchers. We're not just limiting it to the tight ends here, but we're going to go into them a little bit deeper later on. But 15 different Bulldogs caught a pass on Saturday. Well, yes, Kenny McIntosh once again led the team in receiving with 5 receptions for 61 yards. I do want to focus a little bit here on the tight ends. The production was relatively meager, 5 receptions for 90 yards on the day. But you saw why they're going to be an important piece of this offense. When Georgia needs to rev its engine and actually try to win a football game, Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington are guys that are going to be able to make plays for this offense regardless of the opponent. Even when they are covered in some instances, Georgia's going to have to put the ball in the air and trust that Bowers and Washington can make a play. We knew that Bowers was capable of doing that, as we saw time and time again last year, but one of the real positive early developments has been just how improved Washington has been in that aspect of the game.
I've seen through camp an extremely physical blocker. Now, he really hasn't gotten to display that much. He got to display it a little more today, but he hasn't got to really showcase that talent. He is a physical, really good blocker and a really big target, and he's practiced really well. He's done a good job. I continue to say offensively we've got to be in great shape. We've got to be in great conditioning shape because we've got to be able to play with tempo and do things. But Darnell has done everything we've asked him to do. He's practiced really hard. He's played really hard. He's maintained his weight at the right level. He's getting rewarded for it by getting some catches and some touches and also being physical.
Beyond those first 3 pass catchers, Georgia feels pretty confident about what it has in Kyrus Jackson and Ladd McConkey. Those guys have been around for a while and are veterans and are capable of making guys miss in the open field. One thing to watch going forward is the ankle injury that Donnie Mitchell suffered on the first play of the game on Saturday. Kirby Smart said that he could have come back into the game depending on the opponent, but it'll be interesting to see how Georgia chooses to monitor his health status going forward. There's quite a big drop-off between how good of a player Mitchell is and who steps in behind him, whether that be Jackson Meeks or Dylan Bell at this point in time. Georgia's going to liberally get the ball around to guys and try and get the ball in space. Georgia had another 4 receivers hit a 20-yard reception or more on Saturday. And they want to know which players they can trust and which players, when the game is on the line and when there's a game of consequence, they're going to be able to get the football to.
I don't know this in a game plan. It's about gaining depth. We have a good system that allows us to put people in places to say, is he a get-the-ball-to guy? Because you better know who those guys are when you play elite opponents. And some teams will take those get-the-ball plays away from you, and then you get narrowed down to who can touch the ball. And ultimately, football comes down to who can win one-on-one, and we got to figure that out. Fortunately, we've played a couple teams right now that we're better than, and we can get the ball to anybody. You know, it's not going to always be that way, and that's what we've really worked hard on during the week of practices, finding out when it's good on good who the best player is. And what I call good on good is our defense against our offense.
Our first loser from this past weekend were field goals. Zach Podlesny had a pretty good game, knocking home 4 of his 5 field goals, and the only miss happened because Stetson Bennett took an egregious sack in the second half of the game. But Georgia should never be kicking that many field goals in the first place, especially with 4 of them coming in the red zone. Georgia needs to do a better job of executing there and turning those field goal attempts into touchdowns.
I think we're all upset that we didn't execute as well as we could have in the first half, and then come out in the second half didn't do it again. So I think that's why we're still trying, and it didn't work out, and that kind of put a damper on it even more. But we're gonna have to go watch the film and get it fixed.
Against Oregon, Georgia was perfect on offense. Against Samford, it was a little bit less so. In reality, Georgia's going to level off somewhere in the middle between those 2 performances. A season ago, Georgia had a 60% red zone touchdown rate, which is good for 63rd in the nation. That's an area Georgia would like to be a lot better in, as you win games by scoring points and touchdowns are worth more than field goals. One area to really watch with concern going forward is how this offensive line and running backs run between the tackles. Georgia averaged just 4 yards a carry, and while Kendall Milton did some nice things, as Georgia faces physical and stronger SEC defenses, they're going to need this offensive line and these running backs to be able to move the pile and consistently get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-yard plays, along with breaking off some explosive runs in between. Georgia can't win games kicking 4 field goals, certainly against the likes of Alabama, Ohio State, and the other elite programs in the world. So while you're able to get away with that against Samford, that's not something Georgia can rely on a week-in, week-out basis. Our next winner are freshman defenders. Malachi Starks made his first career start after having his first career interception last week against Oregon. He joined Michael Williams in the starting lineup, who came home with Georgia's first sack of the season, notching one in the fourth quarter. Nolan Smith explained why it was such a big deal for Williams to get that first sack and what those young defenders bring to this team.
Oh, I was just so excited, man. I remember my first sack like it was yesterday. So when he got his in Samford, I couldn't do nothing but scream and cheer for him, man. Shout out to him, man. He been making it rain on him, so I was just excited for that.
Is that his celebration, the making it rain thing? How much we
Oh, I don't know. You know, guys do different things, but I was just there to support it.
What have Michael and Malachi brought to this defense to where they're able to contribute right away as freshmen?
I think, like I told people, man, it's plug and play. You know, guys, Coach Smart does a great job recruiting, finding kids that can really play football and really love the game. And then when we get them as a senior, it's my job to make sure they do everything right and teach them the ways and what to do and what not to do.
Georgia's 2022 signing class was heavy with talent on the defensive side of the ball. Starks and Williams were the two highest rated signees in the class, and you can see why they've already made an impact for Georgia. That doesn't include guys like Marvin Jones Jr., Jalen Walker, and Bear Alexander, who are all fighting to find a role on this team in defense. It's hard to have too many takeaways from how this defense played against Samford. Georgia was the better team the second they stepped off the bus and walked into Samford Stadium. But through 2 games, this defense has given up 3 points and has kept 2 teams out of the end zone. And as this team gets better and more experienced over the course of the year, it's going to allow for guys like Starks and Williams to grow into bigger roles. That's a scary thought for opposing teams. This is the most inexperienced and mistake-prone, quite frankly, these guys are ever going to be. And with already making sacks and interceptions this early in their career, it shows why they have such an incredibly high ceiling in their futures with the University of Georgia. Our next loser, polls. Coaches poll has Georgia as the number 2 team in the country. The AP poll has Georgia as the number 1 team in the country. In reality, neither of those matter all that much. The only poll that matters is the final college football playoff poll. And if you're in the top 4 there, you're going to the college football playoff. You hear Georgia talk so much about playing to its standard, and admittedly it didn't do that on Saturday, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's why it's so important to not focus on the polls, but the standard of excellence that Georgia puts out each and every week. If Georgia's playing at its best, it's not going to matter what an AP voter thinks of this team or what a coach filling out his ballot on Sunday morning values about Georgia. If this team plays to its talent level on a week-in, week-out basis, it's going to be one of the best teams in the country. That's why it's amassed as much talent as it has, and that's why even in a 33-0 win over Samford this weekend, Georgia coach Kirby Smart wasn't exactly happy with everything that he saw out there.
So we got to play better. We didn't play our best game, and we know that, and our kids acknowledge that, and we start the SEC gauntlet next week, so that all opens it up.
Our last winner is the Sun Belt. We often don't talk about them on this space here and usually spend more time speaking about the SEC. And while Tennessee beating Pitt, Kentucky beating Florida, and Texas and Alabama fighting it out are certainly worthy of discussion, we should give a little praise here to the Sun Belt Conference. App State went into College Station and beat Texas A&M. Marshall went into Notre Dame and took down the Fighting Irish. And Georgia Southern went up to Nebraska, ate a bunch of corn, and ended the Scott Frost era as the Eagles upset Nebraska, and Frost was ultimately fired on Sunday, even with a $15 million buyout there. Now, we say all of that along with the earlier talk that we had about the playing up to the standard, because the reality is that's what you need to do. You can't look at the opponent and say, oh, they're from the Sun Belt, we're better than them. That's not how it works at high-level college football. As we saw this weekend, if you don't play well, anyone can go out there and beat you, regardless of what your conference affiliation is. And so for Georgia to go in and play their best football week in, week out, regardless of the opponent, whether it be a Samford, an Oregon, or South Carolina, who Georgia sees this upcoming week, Georgia's going to need to be at its best on a week in, week out basis. Because even while as hard as it might be to seem, a Sun Belt team can absolutely go in your stadium and beat a top 10 team, as was the case with both Texas A&M and Notre Dame this weekend. That wraps up our winners and losers segment. Now we're going to transition here into sort of an interview medley. We got to talk to a bunch of players after the game on Saturday, and while most of that has already gone up on the pages of Dog Nation, there are a few other quotes, tidbits, things we learned out there that we want you to hear from. So we've got Stetson Bennett, obviously Kirby Smart, Kendall Milton, Nolan Smith, Darnell Washington as well. Got a ton of great stuff for here. And then coming out of that, when we finish this interview medley, We'll do some live question and answer, probably around the 7:50 mark. We're going to try and do this on an every week basis. It's our second week in a row, 2 for 2 so far, and the hope is that we're able to do this consistently throughout the year. So winners and losers to start the show, interview medley in the middle portion, and then we're going to end it with some live question and answer on the various Dog Nation social channels. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Here is Stetson Bennett, Kendall Milton, Kirby Smart, and a bunch of other Georgia players talking about what happened in the 33-0 win over Samford this past weekend.
Kirby, this being your first home game since winning the championship, there's very little made of it, pre-game or on the video screen or anything about the defending national champions playing their first game at home. Is that all by design?
I don't know. Chip asked that. I have not had one conversation with anybody about I don't know what the expectation should be. I mean, I'm so thrilled about last year, but I'm so into this year that nobody said, oh, Chris Smart, do you not want anything? It's not my decision to say we don't want anything. I haven't even thought about it. We're worried about South Carolina now, but today we're worried about Samford, and it's not really fair for this team to celebrate that because this team didn't do that. Last year's team did that. Well, both. I mean, the red zone stops. I think if we cash in 2 red zones, we're probably sitting here feeling pretty good about our own offense, right? Because we scored, maybe 1 field goal, and now we're 7 plus 5. I don't know how many drives we had, 6. Maybe we're 12 out of 13 touchdowns, and we've had 1 field goal. That doesn't bother you. But when you don't get it multiple times in the first half, and then the second half you come out and you don't get it, and then you put Carson in, and we didn't cash in on a chance in the red area. It's something you got to really work on, and I guarantee it's easily fixable, but a lot of it comes down to execution.
I think 11 different players caught passes in the first half there. How much of that is, you have the ability to spread the ball around, and how much of that was in the game plan? If we want to try and diversify what we have here.
Smith being able to get back from his injury, what have you seen from him in the first 2 games?
He's gaining more confidence. He hit some higher speeds this week, and we played him more. He got an opportunity to play a little more, and he's growing, getting better. He's got to get confidence too. His confidence in his knee, his confidence in our system. And then Nyland, I don't know how far away he is. He didn't dress. He wasn't able to go or work out.
It's a joy to play this offense.
Does it surprise you to see McIntosh be able to run and catch the ball so well? The NFL loves that. Versatile running backs.
Yeah, it's no surprise. That's something that I've been seeing since my freshman year, since I got into Georgia. Every day it's really like that. So just being able to see him do the same thing at a higher level, in front of scouts and in front of national television, that's just makes me happy because at the end of the day, you want to see everybody kind of live their dream and get to the goal they want to do.
My last question: SEC play starts next week. Are you ready on South Carolina or what?
No, we're definitely excited. Yeah, we're going to go into this week and kind of have that same mindset, just to uphold the standard of Georgia football. And we know it's going to be, one of those grinding games, one of those tough games, and especially being in South Carolina, everybody knows about that in South Carolina, the heat and the humidity. So that's something that we kind of have to, we have to embrace that in practice and kind of, like I said, the standard. We have to uphold the standard and just continue to grind. And it's not going to be an easy game. It's going to be one of those games where we're going to have to fight. So I'm excited for this week to grind with my brothers.
They get rowdy though too.
They definitely do, but they get rowdy out here too. So we're just we're ready to embrace the challenge.
I appreciate your time.
Game reps helping them in terms of, like you said, that communication and all that kind of stuff. For those freshmen especially, how much does it help?
It's really just making them feel comfortable and being able to play what they playing in the stadium and not being able to say big lights, it's a big game and stuff. It's able to settle them down and just play football.
For the first home game for the defending national champion, there didn't seem to be a lot of hubbub about the championship, be it on the video board or even the introductions and everything. You think, is that by design? You're trying to just put all that?
Well, I know I 100% want it like that. Even when we went to the SEC Media Day, it's not what we did last year. This is a whole different year. You talking about a championship last year, we just got done playing Samford.
You've been around here a while, played some of these games like this, these FCS games. What do you get out of it? Did you think you learned anything about y'all?
Well, I learned a lot about our young guys, and you get to see a lot of young guys take reps, and I get excited to see all those young guys that work hard, and they put in the same time and effort that we doing for them to get an opportunity to play in Samford. I tell them, man, my times are coming to a short on my days in Samford, so I don't take none of them for granted.
30-0 at halftime. You were disappointed?
Yeah, just Too many field goals.
What was it like to walk out there with your brother in the dog walk today?
That was cool. I had to wait on him a little too long. He was taking forever. I think he was in the last bus, and I was in the first. I was waiting with my aunt. She was at the dog walk, and I was like, well, I'll wait for Luke here so you can see him. It was like 3 minutes, and I was like, geez, dude, we gotta get this thing going.
What do you think Dylan Bell catching his first touchdown today? What do you think that means to him as he continues to integrate himself into this offense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for Dylan, but I hope it shows him that he can do it here. I mean, we all know that he can, and he's a special talent. But you got to come in and work, and same with Jack and all those guys. Obviously AD's got to lead the way, but everybody else, when you're not the guy, you got to keep working, and when you get your shot, you do it. And I think he did well today.
What's your goal?
We probably came out slow, a little bit, but then we just built upon that and just want to improve, man. I mean, that's what we kind of did.
What have you learned about this offense through 2 games?
I feel like with this 2 games, I feel like we still got room for improvement. So I feel like way more room to grow. It would be 10 times better than what we're doing.
Is there anything that sticks out to you that you feel like you guys need to really emphasize getting better?
Nothing specifically at the moment, but I know just me myself, drop passes, things like that, more communication on the O-line, but I mean that just all comes from practice, starts in practice.
There's it seems so far like a lot of quick passing and get the ball to guys, just get it in your hands and let you guys go. Like you get a lot of gaps. Is that kind of the intention so far?
Yeah, just heading into this past week, to this game, it was more of a just get the ball in the explosive, keep the players' hands and just let them do what they do.
You think that's going to carry on?
I'm not really sure what Monken got to score.
Do you like it though?
Yeah, I like whatever. I just run the plays.
It's the second straight game that we've seen Kenny lead the way catching the ball. Just what do you think about him as a pass catcher, what he brings to this offense?
I was very talented. I mean, me myself, I already knew he was, before the season and picked up, but I mean, it ain't surprised me. But,
do you think you can hurdle every defender you come across? It always seems like you're jumping up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could.
How do you feel after 2 weeks, 2 impressive performances for this team? Where you guys at heading into South Carolina next week?
I feel like, for the second week, this past game, I feel like we got to improve. We ain't really played to our standard, but I feel like we're just going to come back Monday and pick it up.
Well, I've got a tremendous athlete, quarterback. We looked hard at both him and their offense in the offseason. We've studied those guys. They got a tremendous team and they got a tremendous atmosphere. And those kids really believe and buy into Shane and their staff. And they'll be a tough opponent. They've gone out and played, on the road in the SEC already, and now we got to go play on the road in the SEC. And we really haven't played that kind of road game yet to see what our team's really all about.
All right, and welcome in another episode of Connor in Coverage. Here talking about Georgia's 33-0 win over Samford yesterday. I can touch a little bit on Georgia playing South Carolina this upcoming week. We can talk about what turned out to be a pretty disastrous day for Atlanta sports. Falcons choking it away to the Aints, and the Braves blowing it to the Mariners. The Mariners are obviously a playoff team. That's not quite as bad there. So you got any questions, comments, things you want to talk about coming out of yesterday? Fire away. It was not, I think, Georgia's best effort, but when you have such a wide talent advantage and you're able to win 33-0 and make it easy, I think that shows just how good this team is. Georgia is now the number 1 ranked team in the country. I think regardless of what you think about the polls or how much they matter, I still find it hard to believe that Georgia isn't the best team in the country at this point, especially after what Alabama did yesterday. I think Ohio State's win over Notre Dame looks a lot less impressive after Marshall knocked them off at home yesterday. You have App State beating Texas A&M there. Clemson, obviously, there are a lot of questions about DJ Uiagalelei and whether he's going to be the quarterback there long term. And so I think with what you saw Georgia do to Oregon, who came out and won last night, I think even after an unimpressive victory against Samford, this is a team that in its first 2 games has outscored opponents 82-3. And, they've come out and shown that, yes, they lost a lot of talent from last year, but the standard at Georgia is going to be excellence on a yearly basis, and they are certainly capable of doing that. Going to go on the road for the first time this week, visit South Carolina. Gamecocks are coming off a 44-30 loss to Arkansas last week, and I'll be interested to see Georgia going into a hostile environment. As it stands right now, the weather is actually not supposed to be too bad. It's around like 82, 83 degrees. The high there in Columbia on Saturday. If that's the case, it's certainly not as hot as it usually is. I can recall back in 2018 when that was a 3:30 kick and it was about 115 degrees in the field down there. So it'll be an interesting game. Spencer Rattler is a guy that's a lot of people think he's really talented. I'm kind of skeptical of that, but the team, Shane Beamer, they pulled off some nice wins last year over Auburn, over Florida, and this is going to be a game that South Carolina as a whole is fired up for because this is their biggest SEC game, and for Georgia, it's first true road game of the year, first SEC game of the year. It's a chance to go out there and I think right a lot of the wrongs that you saw against Samford this past weekend. We'll start here. Kevin Ward's thoughts on Starks. This guy's he's already good, and obviously he's going to make some mistakes. So when I say he's going to be good, like he's going to have some plays where he's out of position and just natural freshman growing pains. But the fact that Georgia gets 3 more years of this guy, I think Starks is going to be an unbelievable player. He and Michael Williams got starts on Saturday. We touched on that earlier in winners and losers. And I think when you're able to add those guys into this defense, the secondary I feel pretty good about going into this year and what we're going to see from them going forward. You'd like to see maybe a little bit more of a pass rush, but again, I think a lot of that has been dictated by what Oregon and Samford have tried to do in terms of getting the ball out quickly. And so, yes, Georgia only has 1 sack that came via Michael Williams, but I think a lot of that is how opposing teams have chosen to play Georgia, and Georgia has not yet given up a touchdown. So I think it's hard to sort of argue with the results there. And Jalen Carter, Jamon Dumas-Johnson both got close. This is a team that I think the pass rush and the sacks will pick up, assuming teams want to play, that sort of way where you have to try and hit explosive plays, because for you to try and connect on 13, 14 play drives, I think is really tough when even as young as this Georgia defense still is, there's still a lot of talent and guys are going to be flying around and making plays like that. And I think Starks is a perfect example of that. John Adams, I'm assuming you mean Kenny here because Kenny McIntosh has led Georgia in receptions and passing yards through the first 2 games. He's clearly an asset in that area of the field. I think A.D. Mitchell's injury certainly helps Kenny in terms of his involvement there. Georgia's going to get him the ball in space. I think, though, when it needs to be said and Georgia needs to make a play in the passing game, whenever that might be, Bowers is going to be the guy they go to. He is so uncoverable, and there just aren't a lot of athletes out there that can stay with him. And so I think when Georgia really needs points and they really need to move the ball, Bowers is going to be the guy they get it to. Now, can Kenny, over the course of the season statistically lead them in receiving? I certainly think that's the case given what we've seen from him so far and Georgia wanting to get him the ball out there in space. Let's see. Yeah, Billy Boy brings up, again, offense. I think the bigger qualm was, 4 field goals there. You can't, especially in the red zone, like you need to turn those into touchdowns. And if it's, doing the quick math here, take off 6 points. Let's say it's like 41-0. I think we all feel a lot better there. But because, they took 2 more field goals instead of 2 touchdowns, as Kirby Smart sort of alluded to, I think that you see there Kirby Smart, knowing that they need to be a little bit better in that area of the field there, because against Alabama, you think back to last year, a big reason Alabama didn't win the national title game was because they got in the red zone a couple of times, but they kept having to settle for field goals. They only scored 1 touchdown in that game, and that came on a shortened field there. And so, that's, you hear coaches talk about execution, being able to get touchdowns when you're in the red zone. That is absolutely that. Jerry Dogs fan. So in some spots, yes, guys rotate pretty liberally. They'll move guys around. Ohio State will do this. What's unique right now about this Georgia team is they're playing a lot of guys on the offensive line. As many as 9 guys could be considered guys that I think they'd feel comfortable putting out there with first team reps. And I sort of wrote about this last week, and Kirby Smart talked about this in his press conference there. He thinks the idea of, knowing who you're going to be playing next to and sort of developing that chemistry is a little bit overrated in the sense that those guys rep it all week in practice. And so, Tate Ratledge knows what it is like to play next to either Amarius Mims or Warren McClendon there at that right tackle position. And so I think that's maybe the one big wrinkle that we've seen this year. They've rotated pretty liberally at wide receiver in the defensive line in years past. And obviously they've had a 4-man rotation at that linebacker position, but what makes this team unique this year is just how many bodies they are shuttling in on the offensive line. I think as Georgia gets into SEC play, I'm going to be interested in seeing, does Georgia keep doing that? And is that, something where third drive of the game, Amarius Mims is coming in at right tackle. Later on, Devin Willock's going to come in at left tackle. And so I think that's sort of what we want to see as this offensive line continues to develop. Let's see. Scrolling. Ricky, I think this is just yesterday. He had a couple throws that were high, and ironically, Stetson finished the day 24 of 34 for 300 yards. So it's literally the only incompletions were the ones we were noticing, or it so to seem. He had a high throw to Darnell. He had a high throw to Brock that both could have been touchdowns. I think he had a similar one to Ladd McConkey there. I think that was just a product of yesterday. Stetson, good. It was a B game from him. Obviously not as great as he was against Oregon, but I can also understand when you've got guys that are as vertically gifted as Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers, you can understand why those throws may be a little bit higher because you trust, certainly in Darnell's standpoint, hey, I just know if I throw this high, he's going to be able to go up there and get it. And wasn't quite able to come down with it, but I think even Stetson would admit he's just a little bit off in terms of what he wanted out of yesterday. And again, when you're complaining about Stetson Bennett having a 300-yard passing day, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, 24-35. That's roughly a 65-70% completion percentage. It shows you how far his game is coming. Yes, it's Samford, but I'll be interested to sort of see what he looks like this week. Is it more what we saw against Oregon, or again, similarly, just a little bit off in some of those throws there in the red area? Let's see. Comments, thoughts, questions here. Scrolling through. Barry Watkins, yeah, so Georgia came in number 1 in the AP poll, number 2 in the coaches poll. First college football playoff poll does not come out until, I believe, the Georgia-Florida week, that Tuesday. So we've got some time before the poll that matters the most actually comes out here. And I do think that eventually when we get there, Georgia's going to be one of those 4 teams. And, excuse me. You see Texas A&M lose yesterday. You see Notre Dame lose yesterday. Again, Georgia, they got to take care of themselves every week. And if they do that, the win-loss results are going to be there. And I think this is absolutely a team that is going to be in a playoff hunt come the end of the season. Let's see. Yeah, and Curtis Williams brings up. Yeah, I think they got their hands on the balls, and maybe if the weather's a little bit better, if it wasn't quite so wet down there on the field, maybe they're able to bring those in as touchdowns. Let's see. Adam Butts asked, so Arkansas put up 44 last week, and I like to think that Georgia has a better offense, or at least a more potent offense than what Arkansas has. I know Arkansas uses tempo and space pretty well. And so I think that's why they're able to have a lot of success. KJ Jefferson is a very good quarterback. And so, Arkansas clearly did some things right against South Carolina, rolling up 44 points on that defense. Again, I think this Georgia offense, if they're out there executing like they did against Oregon, I don't think they're certainly on their regular season schedule is a team that has the athletes to slow them down and stop them. Even you look at a Kentucky or a Tennessee, Tennessee gave up 27 points, but a lot of those came to a backup quarterback after Keaton Slovis got hurt. And so I think looking at Georgia's schedule here, even Adam Butts is asking how many points Carolina puts up. I mean, I think the idea that Georgia's not just going to give up a touchdown, I could see 17 points. We've heard so much about regression in terms of what this defense is going to fall back into. At some point, they're going to be able to hit on big plays. South Carolina did that a year ago. Josh Vann had a very productive game there against that secondary. And so I'll be interested to see how South Carolina chooses to attack this Georgia defense. I don't think you're going to see South Carolina do what Oregon and Samford did in terms of the quick passing game. I think they're going to have to say, we're going to ask our offensive line to hold up. We know you guys have some studs up there, but we want to see them prove it first, because I think for Georgia, if you're going to beat them, as Alabama showed last year, you have to be able to hit on big plays, and that means holding the ball a little bit longer and taking some more risks. And if you're not willing to do that, well, then quite frankly, you're just not going to beat Georgia. You're not beating Georgia and scoring on their defense by trying to dink and dunk their way down the field. Gary Parks asks, who do I think will give Georgia the biggest challenge in the SEC East? Kentucky's going to finish second in the SEC East this year, but I think in terms of play style, give me Tennessee, because Kentucky just tries to play too similar to Georgia, and Georgia is going to be able to out-athlete them, and that's why I think it's always going to be very tough for Kentucky to beat them, whereas Tennessee, the way that they play the speed and tempo and space with which they play on the offensive side of the ball, I do think is going to allow them to maybe, score some points potentially. We'll see what the defense is looking like by that point in the year. Now, Tennessee's defense needs to very much improve off of what we've seen under the Josh Heupel era so far. But I do think, in terms of a one-off game, I do think Tennessee maybe can do a little bit more there. I mean, Florida last night with Anthony Richardson, that was an incredibly poor performance by him. And, as great as he was against Utah, I think a lot of people have some questions about what this Florida team looks like. And in 2 weeks, they're going to go to Knoxville for a really big game. And, as great as things were for Florida coming out of that Utah game and getting that first win under Billy Napier and all the momentum that sort of went there, you're 2-2 after that Florida game, and you're looking at games against Texas A&M. I know they lost. LSU, I know they lost as well, but those are going to be tough teams to play in addition to Georgia. Again, I think this is a tricky part of the schedule for Florida to navigate there. But if you give me one team, I would probably say Tennessee just because of the way they play and the uniqueness with which they have on their offensive side of the ball. Let's see. Let's maybe do one or two more questions here. You've obviously got Brandon Adams tomorrow morning on Dog Nation Daily. Mike Griffith on the beat tomorrow as well. We've got a Kirby Smart press conference as Georgia gets ready for South Carolina this coming week. 12 p.m. kickoff. I believe ESPN is broadcasting the game there. So it should be another early start for Georgia. The next two games are noon kickoffs, as Georgia's next home game is against Kent State on September 24th. And I say that with absolutely no enthusiasm in my voice because that is a game that Georgia will once again roll as they did over Samford on Saturday. Let's see. Prediction for this weekend? Yeah, I'll give you a prediction. I think Georgia's going to win. I think I've seen the line was 25. I kind of like Georgia at that number there. Obviously they're going to need to play better on the offensive side of the ball, at least in terms of the red zone area. Again, this Georgia offense under Stetson Bennett has punted one time, and even that came because of a false start on a fourth down. And so I think this offense is going to be able to name its score. I think they can get to 50 points pretty easily here against a South Carolina defense that seems pretty suspect and is already missing some key players back there. And so, defensively, I'll be interested in seeing what this team looks like against South Carolina. Bo Nix is a talented quarterback. I think him and Spencer Rattler are maybe in the same sort of vein there. And so I'll be interested to see what South Carolina does and how they choose to attack this team. Question, and we'll end on this. What's the deal with AD? Yeah, so Donnie Mitchell leaves yesterday's game after the first offensive play with a left ankle injury, got limped over to the sideline, got it checked out. Kirby Smart said in postgame that he thinks if the game were a bigger deal, if it were a better opponent, he would have been able to come back in and play. We'll see about that. I wouldn't be surprised if they are precautionary with Mitchell and hold him out this weekend against South Carolina, because you don't need AD Mitchell to beat South Carolina, but you're going to need him to be 100% later in the season. And I think one of my takeaways from this weekend is just how AD Mitchell, even though he may not lead Georgia in receptions or receiving yards, his skill level raises the tide and raises the boats, rather, of all the other Georgia wide receivers because of the way that he's able to stretch the field vertically and the quick twitch ability that he has. I think that opens things up underneath for guys like Ladd McConkey, Karis Jackson, and their ability to make guys miss, I think complements what Mitchell does really well. So we'll get an update from Kirby tomorrow in greater detail on what Mitchell is. I think this could be a 2-3 week injury where maybe you don't see him the next two games because Georgia is that well off and they can afford to be precautious when it comes to this injury thing, because at the end of the season, as AD Mitchell showed last year, he's absolutely the kind of player that you need to have to win those games at the end of the year there. So that'll do it for us here tonight. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's been Connor and Coverage. We do this every Sunday night at 7:30. We do winners and losers. We do a little interview medley, and we do about 15 minutes of questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. And Georgia coming off a 33-0 win over Samford. They are playing South Carolina this weekend at noon. Dog Nation will have a ton of content and coverage for you guys leading up to that game. A noon kickoff in Columbia, South Carolina. Georgia takes on the Gamecocks this coming weekend. Georgia 2-0. The number one team in the country after a big 33-0 win over Samford. That'll do it for me here tonight. My name is Connor Riley. This has been a Dog Nation production. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.